Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight at the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice virtual headquarters at our Social Justice Power Hour. My name is Robert Seda-Schreiber. I'm the chief activist here, and I'm thrilled to be with you tonight. Our guest is phenomenal, inspirational, and going to be such an incredible conversation and journey to experience together, and I cannot wait to bring her on. But before we do, I want to tell you about some things that are going on, because there are so many things. The Power Hour is just becoming as exponential as it is inspirational. So I wanted to share with you our upcoming guests right quick, but I do want to get to our guest tonight. So please let us do what we need to do, which is a little bit of just letting you know, informing you what's what. Tomorrow night we have the amazing Amani Gandhi with us. She is, by her own nomenclature, reproductive justice battle mage. And I suggest over the next 24 hours you check her out on Twitter at Angry Black Lady. She is spot on. What she says and what she does and the way she represents is incredible. And I cannot wait to talk with her tomorrow night. That's Amani Gandhi tomorrow night. And then, of course, Friday night, we have our open and out mic night, where we bring our spirit and our talents to the virtual stage together. And then we're going to go through, we have, on Monday night, we have Hugh Ryan coming back to us virtually. He was at our center physically last summer, right after Pride, and his book, When Brooklyn Was Queer, is just a phenomenal read. If you haven't gotten it yet, get it, read it over the weekend, and then prep some great questions for Hugh Ryan. And then Wednesday, we're going to bring back Dr. Peniel Joseph, The Sword and the Shield, the wonderful book we talked about a few weeks ago about Malcolm and Martin. He's going to be our first return guest to talk about all the things that we didn't get to talk about last time and take a deeper dive into the things that we did. And then Friday, my gosh, we're doing an amazing cross program with our beautiful, wonderful friends and community partners at McCarter Theater, McCarter at Home, and ourselves are going to bring to you a community play reading, Execution of Justice by Emily Mann. Emily will be with us. We'll be reading the play together and then joining in a wonderful discussion afterwards. And I want to thank the incredible Paula Alexson for helping to coordinate all that as well. And then just quick hits. Mike Kaplan is going to be joining us, and wonderful stand-up comic and beautiful soul. Can't wait to have him on board in a couple of weeks. We're going to have the incredible Lauren Duca with us as well coming up. And finally, this book, Sunny Days, The Children's Television Revolution That Changed America by David Camp. Just got an incredible review in the Times yesterday. Go pick it up. And then come meet David virtually. He'll be with us. I'm so excited about this time we're going to spend together. Just so many things happening. The Power Hour, as always, more than I ever dreamed it would be. I really thought that after we closed our doors, because we couldn't just keep our beanbag 6 feet apart, that wasn't enough anymore. This virtual experience was meant for our community, so I wouldn't not be there for our friends and our community and all the people that we love. And what it's turned into is so incredible. And it's because of you, more than all these extraordinary guests, and our guests are extraordinary, but more than those folks and how impressive they are, it's you, the folks that come and watch with us, to share with us, to ask questions, to give snaps, just to witness this experience and be together. You're what makes this community everything that is inspirational and aspirational. And thank you for your time. And speaking of inspirational, let's bring on our guest. And thank you for being patient. Please join us tonight. We have with us Amazin LeThi. Was that
Amazin
close?
LeThi, close. LeThi.
I've been practicing all day, so I apologize. Names are so important, so let me get it right. Amazin LeThi.
LeThi, yes.
Yes. All right. Amazin is, oh my gosh, what you have done with your life and your journey, and I cannot wait to share with everybody, but let me give them a snapshot so they know what we're talking about. Both an athlete ally and Stonewall Ambassador, global LGBTQIA sports equality activist, you journey from being homeless to going to the White House to starting your own foundation. And everything that you've done in between is just everything that we can do upon this earth, is to bring ourselves, our spirit, our talents, our strength, and for you, that's literal and figurative, right? To each other. So please share with us, tell us about yourself, what you've done, what you're doing, and then we'll go into it in a big deep dive into all of it, because I cannot wait to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for spending time with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, I'll start with my journey and my story, because I really wouldn't be the person that I am today without that. I was born in Vietnam. I'm a transracial adoptee. I was adopted into a country, a family living in Australia. So I had my formative years living in Australia before I went to Europe and to the US. And, you know, with what I see with the Trump administration, I went through that as a child, and I'm kind of now reliving it again through the coronavirus racism. When I was growing up in Australia, you know, very confused about my sexuality, never seeing an Asian person on TV, let alone ever meeting an LGBTQ person. You know, we had an administration that publicly said that they didn't want to be Asianized, that Asians were invading the country, and that, you know, they had to leave. So I always grew up feeling like I was othered, and, you know, my worth wasn't very important in the world. I suffered a lot of daily racism in society, with teachers, in the school system, with kids, and inside as well, being very confused about who I felt inside and my sexuality, but not having any words for it. You know, I remember as a child being really picked on at school, and I think of the bullying that LGBTQ youth go through and how that affects us into our adulthood. I have one poignant moment as a child when I must have been like 7 or 8. The teacher made me stand up in front of everyone and basically said, you know, this is what failure looked like. And at most in life, I would fail. And every kid laughed at me. There must have been about 30 kids in the room. And the teacher just made me stand there. And as I was sitting down thinking, I can't cry because everyone is looking at me and laughing at me, the teacher threw a blackboard eraser. And I just remember the wooden bit just hitting there and thinking, I just don't want to feel this humiliated ever again. And I don't want any child to feel like that. And I didn't really have a sense of community as a child. I was definitely, you know, growing up in an all-white background, looking very different, feeling very different inside. Sport became my haven. I did a lot of team sports and a lot of athletics, but I saw very quickly that I was the only Asian kid in sport. And so that bullying and that racism continued through sports. My teammates picked on me, the coaches picked on me. I remember one clear moment that the coach pulled me aside and said, well, you know, Asian kids, you know, Asian people, you're quite slow. You can't really run as fast. You know, I don't think sprinting is exactly for you. I think maybe long distance running. So I felt like I was kind of pushed out of sports that I loved. And I ended up doing long distance running for a period of time. And I kind of proved them right because I was actually quite good at it. And I went then to bodybuilding really young. I was probably like 7 or so when I first picked up my first dumbbells. And it was really initially to build that strength and that confidence in myself, because I was being bullied so much. And, I felt very low in my self-worth as well. And then I started going to the gym before I was 10, which was obviously very unusual for a kid, an Asian kid, and obviously a girl as well. But I went very quickly and understood going from child sports to adult sports, and completely male dominated, very misogynistic, very sexist as well. And I encountered a terrible amount of misogyny and sexism in the gym environment. And my adopted mother would literally just drop me off at the gym and go shopping. It was kind of like babysitting, but I didn't really go anywhere, and I had no money, and the guy who owned the gym just kind of let me through. But the men in the gym were really horrible. That kind of, that what Trump describes as locker room talk. They did it to my face, behind my back. But I really loved the sport. It was something that I could do myself, and that it started to build this confidence in me, because I also started to see my body changing. And when I think of mental health with LGBTQ youth, I think that, it's a human right. Everyone deserves to play sports, because I know how much I thrived through sports. And it really makes me so sad and so angry, when I hear about laws, anti-trans laws that's passed in such as Idaho, where in the entire state, a trans youth can't play sports. It makes me feel so angry inside, because I remember what sports did for me and how I thrived through sports, and how it gives you so many different life skills that you would take through in your day-to-day life. So I started competing in bodybuilding as a teenager, and that was really unusual for a young Asian woman competing in bodybuilding. I was the only bodybuilder on the circuit, but I loved it so much, and I loved the competitive streak of bodybuilding. So I competed in a number of sports, and then from there I qualified as a strength training coach and started training other athletes as well. And then my ultimate dream was to work in the entertainment industry, and I didn't have any Asian role models, so I kind of latched onto the first one, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I spent so much time in the gym looking at bodybuilding magazines, and he was the only person that popped up literally over and over again. And for me, it wasn't so much Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it was the fact that there was someone that was different, that came from a faraway place, that had this strange accent, but was able to use sports to levitate himself, and obviously go to a faraway place and live in the US. But I had such a hard time in the entertainment industry. People would just laugh at me. I remember going for an audition at MTV, and they just kind of looked at my portfolio and looked at me and said there would never be a market for an Asian female athlete in the entertainment industry, and you might as well start looking for another career, because no one is going to hire you. And then I remember going to a very well entertainment agency, and literally as soon as I walked in the door, the woman looked at my portfolio and literally frog marched me out the door again, and started laughing and said, you've got to be joking. No one would be interested in an Asian athlete in the entertainment industry. Though I persevered, and I started doing quite a bit of commercial work and TV work and radio work. But I still felt very, with the feelings that I had, particularly with my sexuality, I felt very alone and isolated. I didn't meet my first gay person until I was a teenager. So, through my childhood years, that feeling of difference, I literally thought and felt like the only LGBTQ Asian kids I ever. I didn't think that there were other people like me. So I always think that the position that I am in today, it's so important to share your story, because there's going to be some person listening who looks at that and thinks that's my story. And then, in my young adults life, I moved overseas, and I kind of literally spiraled out of control. And I think, I held so much trauma and so much pain inside of me through the constant bullying as a child, that difference I felt with sexuality. And I literally just spiraled out of control. I ended up in a very bad crowd who were doing drugs, smoking, alcohol, partying all night. And, one thing led to another, and I just ended up homeless. And I realized that for many of us, we're a paycheck away from poverty and homelessness. So many of us are living on the breadline. And I think, for me, it was literally my darkest years that I've ever had, of just feeling so helpless inside, constantly suicidal, severe depression, mental health issues. I remember one point going to a cocaine party and people rolling up notes, and one person offered it to me, and I really held myself back. I so wanted to do it, but I thought, if I go down this road, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull myself out, because it's such a struggle, even just opening my eyes and getting up. I do remember, a number of different poignant moments. I remember once I was sitting in a homeless shelter, and I just felt so low. I really felt that I couldn't sink any lower. I just remember sleeping for 2 days straight, waking up the next day and crying for another 24 hours, and then ending up in this kind of fetal position in a corner, thinking, what has become of my world? I have sunk so low. I don't know if I could go any lower. And I think, a lot of people ask, how did you pull yourself? Because it's a very dark place to be in, and it's a very, very, very hard place to be able to pull yourself out. And I just remember that moment when that teacher made me stand up. And I get emotional thinking about it as a child. And I think, actually, committing suicide, that would have been my greatest failure. And I had this big why. And I think, that's what really helped me, that I felt that I had so much more to give still in the world. I had no idea what it was, because there I was, I'm homeless, I'm suicidal, I'm highly depressive, I've got absolutely no money, I'm heavily in debt. And then I'm thinking, I have so much more to give to the world right now. I'm thinking and that's what helped me get me out.
Right.
And I mean, it was the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I had a mental breakdown pulling myself out of it. I mean, it was just so hard. And, I know that when you're at that point, when you've begged on the street, when you've lived in homeless shelters, when you feel like the world has just made you absolutely less than the dirt that they walk on, you know how marginalized you feel, and how society pushes the most marginalized people to the corner of the earth. And I think, with LGBTQ youth homelessness, how it's such an epidemic that, LGBT youth only make up 3 to 5% of the whole youth population, but over 40 to sometimes 50% are made homeless. And I was reading a new report I think in the US, just one city alone in Atlanta, there are at least 800 LGBT youth who are homeless. And I think I was the lucky one who was able to pull myself out, but there were so many that just don't have that in them, and don't have that strength, don't have that sense of why, or that sense of hope to be able to do that. And I really bring so much of it back to sports. Sports helped me push through those pain barriers, and sport helped me thrive. Um, in the life that I have. And I think, I wouldn't be the person that I am today, and I wouldn't be this advocate in this world that raises their voice whenever I see it, injustice, because I think that my suffering is your suffering, and my suffering will only end when your suffering ends. And that's why I do all the work that I do, but also why I use sport as a platform to change hearts and minds, because it's such a unifying tool in the world, and a language that everyone can relate to. And when I think of what's going on now, I think we need to use that power of sport when we're coming out of the coronavirus pandemic as a unifying message to bring us all together.
I think that's wonderful. I want to say this. I'm pretty sure that you're the only guest we've had on thus far in the 10 weeks that we've been on the air that has been inspired by Arnold Schwarzenegger. So congratulations for that. That's pretty impressive.
I know, people go, really? And I think, it wasn't necessarily the person, it was, how that person got there. And, and to be honest, as a child sitting in a gym reception reading, all you have are bodybuilding magazines to read. And it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's like the only person that keeps popping up that's also, they share their story.
I mean, I think it's the way, but it's so poetic, and this is what I really, forgive me, this is what I really love about you, is that it's a joke, right? It's funny. Arnold Schwarzenegger was, but what you speak of in that his accent and his outsiderism, and that he was a stranger in a strange land, all of that works towards your identity, and that's what you had to grasp onto. And we've been talking about that literally almost every night on the show, in some aspect or another, whether it's concrete, like when we had Chris Mosier on, a fellow athlete, and he talked about not knowing the word transgender and what that was, and how to come to that. And that's when he realized identity, when he found that word and that identity in the community. So when you speak to that, it's so telling how important it is, the work you're doing now. And especially because no one person represents any community, but you have pieces of you that people can look to. The Asian community, the queer community, athletes. There are so many, formerly homeless, all these things, these struggles that you've been through, that you've persevered, is such an inspiration to so many people. There are some questions and some comments from folks, so I want to get to that because it's really important that we recognize the community. And Kiko Johnson says, I'm appreciating your voice, especially as an Asian American trans community leader myself, now in the Bay Area in California. I wish I could have accessed sports as a young person. And I think that right there, and here is from Cynthia, inspirational, I wish you health and happiness. What is your best record for lifting? In pounds, if possible. Can you translate to pounds for us?
I can actually. I do lift in pounds. I'm naturally actually very strong. And interesting, thank you, Cynthia, for that question, is that, in the gym, I learned very quickly, how do you engage men in a way that you gain their respect? And it's through lifting weights, heavy weights, outlifting them, matching them, and beating them. So in terms of a squat, my best squat is 500 pounds. In terms of a leg press, 1,000 pounds. In terms of lifting a one arm dumbbell row for back, it was the top dumbbell in the gym. It was 150 pounds. I can still do 120 pound one arm dumbbell rows. I don't squat 500 pounds now, but I can go up to 200 pounds.
That's incredible. That's so impressive. I want to Stephanie says, I am an out transgender woman. How does that speak to your journey? And I want to say that Stephanie is one of the people who visits the center regularly. She was one of the people who, when we had to close our doors, I was concerned because I would miss her so much, and wanted to make sure that she had a voice still. And she's one of the inspirations for us doing the Power Hour. So I'm so glad she's with us tonight. So how does that speak to your journey? As far as someone like Stephanie, do you relate to that as well?
In terms of her being an out trans woman, in terms of my own.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that what Stephanie's looking for is that sense of camaraderie, that sense of connection, and how do we as communities become intersectional, so we recognize each other's journeys and the parts of them that are similar. All of us, have our struggles and our strife, and whether it's coming out, whether it's dealing with that teacher that was so awful to you. Those are the moments that we can kind of relate to each other and say, this part is something that you probably experienced too.
Sure. When I think of my own journey, and when I see people who are obviously different from me, obviously I meet so many different people in the world, I think one needs to come to another person with an open heart, and also willing to listen. Because a lot of time we don't listen to that person's story. We just hear a narrative that we've pulled from media, and then we take that as that person's story. And when you share your story and listen to others, then you see that we're different, but we're the same. And I think I do a lot, I'm such a massive trans ally, and I'm always speaking up, particularly on social media, and particularly against these anti-trans bills around, trans youth and trans people not allowing to play sports, and obviously the horrible bill that now we're fighting in Idaho. And I think when I think of that, I think of my own story in terms of how I was bullied in sports and how sports made me thrive, and how I think that, sports doesn't know your gender or sexuality, and it has nothing to do about that. It's about the love of sports and team spirit and what it does to you, and denying that from someone. I think that's a basic human right. And I think I've learned a lot, and for me, going on this, particularly this journey, because I used never to share my story as well. And I think through vulnerability we find courage as well, courage in ourselves, but also in others, and a connection. And when you can fully see me, and when I can fully see you, then we can build a connection. But it obviously starts with being open to that and sharing.
And being able to, right? I mean, that you said that you didn't see anybody like you. You were forced to look to Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it says something about a lack of visibility, a lack of recognition, a lack of respect for any marginalized community, that we don't allow them to be seen, not only in media, but you think about it on the street. And one of the things that always broke my heart, because my uncles are gay, and I grew up, and I found out when I was 11 years old, and our family was so accepting, but I thought about how they had to hide their love. And when you walk down the street, you can't hold hands, and to me, that was something that was so devastating that I couldn't comprehend it. And I think that that's a huge part of it, right? Is not only is there a lack of representation in the media, there's a lack of representation on the street and in the hallways and in the classrooms. And we need to really people like you speaking up so loudly and so proudly and so strongly and so passionately is so important.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a difference between being an ally for someone and then being an advocate. Because you can be an ally and go, yeah, I'm an ally. I wear the trans badge for my trans friends. I'm an ally. But it's like, well, how often do you speak up? Like, you need to be an advocate for other communities when they're not in the room and someone says something transphobic or biphobic or sexist or racist. You need to be the first to speak up as well. And absolutely, representation is so important. When it comes to TV and film, trans people need to play their own roles because it's their authentic story and it's their lived experience. And the amount of work then you'll be able to give trans people by doing that. Cisgender people get enough roles and we need to move aside for that. When I think of Asian people, it's only very recently that you've started to see Asian LGBTQ characters. I can think of one quite prominently, Grace Choi in Black Lightning, who plays an Asian LGBTQ superhero. And I think that's fantastic because a little Asian kid can watch that and think, I'm LGBTQ and I'm a superhero.
And we've talked about this so much. Pulling in a couple of threads, you talked about being an advocate versus being an ally, and we had on Tre'vell Anderson last week, and we were talking about passing the mic and making sure that you never speak for anybody, but with everybody. And that's really important too, to recognize that if you're involved with another community, if you're there to speak up for them when they're not, that's fantastic. But when they're there themselves, when there's a role to be played, we have to make sure that their presence is known and felt and acknowledged and respected. And I know you've worked with GLAAD too. And we had Alex Schmitter on a couple weeks ago, and amazing the work that Alex is doing and making sure that transgender folks are represented in the media in the not only in the appropriate way, because we can't settle for appropriate anymore, right? We have to strive for more. We have to strive for celebration. We have to strive for respect and recognition, and making sure that they're fully developed. And again, as you said, played by the appropriate member of that community.
Oh, absolutely. And I think of myself when I was a child and just couldn't see anyone that looked like me. And then you think, and with that, your feelings become so singular because you think, I'm the only person that feels this way. I'm the only person that looks like me. Am I normal? Because I don't see any of this representation of, as a child, I had to create my own narrative of who I was going to become, and if who I was going to become was going to be okay. And that was really hard to do. You think of how many LGBTQ youth and people who suffer because they just can't see themselves.
And I think that, and I think also all those classmates of yours and that teacher that did that awful thing, if they would have seen other people like you as well, that wouldn't have happened, because you wouldn't be the other. And that's how they do it. They make this community the other. They make that community the other, and if they're seen on screen, if they're seen in a comic book, if they're seen on the street, then they can't be the other anymore because they're part of our shared experience. And you touched on such an important thing, and the fact that you have strived pretty much your entire life to do that for others is just a phenomenal thing. And getting back to that, so your story was that you were homeless and that you knew, even though you had nothing literally and figuratively, that you had more to offer, that you had something to give. So then how do you get from being homeless to the White House?
If someone told me in that moment, of despair that one day you're going to go to the White House and you're going to have a picture of yourself in Joe Biden's house with his wife, I'd be like, oh, really? You're crazy. And now I'm working with Team Biden. I had never planned this journey. It's not like I, sat down and thought, okay, these are the steps that I'm going to take, and then I'm going to go to the White House, and then I'm going to be listed in Out 100 in 2019. I always felt that if I shared my story enough, someone would listen. And if I kept doing good work, someone would notice. And I always had that belief that whenever possible, I have to share my story. Not for me, but I know what it would have meant for me when I was 6, when I was 12, when I was, 15, and someone will notice and it will resonate with someone. But how I got to the White House was that I was invited during the Obama administration to the first global LGBTQ human rights forum. And the reception was at the Vice President's home. So that's how I got to the White House. And then the Asian American the Asian American Initiative, during the Obama administration, they launched the first anti-bullying campaign, Act to Change, and I was one of the first stories with Jeremy Lin and George Takei and Malik Pachoni. And since then, I do a lot of governmental work, working with governments all around the world, having closed door discussions and open door discussions around the challenges and barriers that Asian LGBTQ people face within the community, and how we can use sport as a platform for equality within our own communities. I do a lot of work with all the political campaigns as well, because I think, these are conversations that are missed. When I think of what's going on at the moment with the corona racism towards the Asian community, globally, I see how little the world knows about our community, that, we are stereotyped in the press, and it's perpetrated continually in media that we're the invisible model minority race. Nothing happens to us. But we have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Asian kids are bullied the most out of all ethnic kids. And then on top of that, if you're LGBTQ, Asian youth have one of the highest rates of bullying in sports, one of the lowest participation rates, and one of the highest dropout rates if they do ever make it into sports. Within pro sports, we're very far and few between. I mean, when I think of Jeremy Lin, of how much racism that he received, and his history of sharing all the racism that he received, through his youth and through college, playing sports, and this whole wave of corona racism towards my community now, which is very racist and very violent. I mean, so many, and I mean, it's traumatic every single day seeing, someone being punched in the face or slashed by a knife, or, little Asian kids for the first time being told, not to eat cats and dogs. And it's so dangerous when you give a virus and ethnicity as well. And I think, moving forward, we just have to be kinder to each other and more compassionate, and stop for a minute and realize that words matter, if they're racist or sexist or transphobic or homophobic or biphobic or xenophobic, because there's lasting effects on an individual. And I think of the LGBTQ community, we have a very high rate of suicide and mental health. Obviously, there's so much bullying and, anti-LGBTQ and anti-trans within this pandemic, and obviously this administration isn't helping, but we need to look beyond that, because as an LGBT community, we need to unify in a way that we haven't. And when we come out of this pandemic, it has to be different for all of us.
That's what I want to get to. So how do we make it different? I mean, how do we put this in concrete terms? We can't. This is not the new normal. This is the new right now. But there has to be a new normal when we come out, because what this pandemic has done is it's shown a light on all the difficulties that we have in our society. It hasn't created them. There's been nothing created by this virus as far as our societal problems. It's just showed us how incredibly epidemic they are in and of themselves. So you have so much experience in persevering over these things personally. Do you have insight on how we as a community, as a combined community, all the different communities that we represent, all the intersectional communities that we can embrace each other, how do we come together to make a new normal after this and say, okay, we've seen the inequities, we've seen the racism, we've seen the xenophobia, we've seen all the difficulties, none of them created now, but exacerbated by now. So when we come out, how do we make it better?
Sure. We need to have intersectional conversations. So many times we just sit in our silos. And I always go back to being a trans advocate, because the trans community are fighting for their life and fighting against all these anti-bills, but they need the allies of cisgender people like myself, who can speak to other cisgender people as to the reasons why that trans people are part of our community, and they have, and trans rights are human rights, and we must be a trans advocate. With a lot of the work that I do with governments is bringing all different communities together, because we can't have these singular conversations. And there's obviously now a shift in business and CSR, because the most marginalized communities needs help. And when we look at LGBTQ community, LGBTQ youth was suffering beforehand, but they're really suffering now.
Right. It's an amazing time. You talk about being a transgender advocate and making sure we speak for that community, but also allowing, obviously, them to speak for themselves first and foremost. When we go out and we do diversity training a lot at the center, and go out to schools and businesses and law enforcement and various other entities. And one of the things we're always confronted with is when we're talking about terminology and gender identification, and we talk about transgender and we talk about cisgender, and there more often than not there is a resistance from cisgender folks to embrace the word cisgender. They're like, why do we don't need to have a term, we're just, and then the trail off is always normal. We're normal, and then they're the transgender folks, and that's the essential thing, isn't it? We need terminology for all of us, because otherwise it creates, again, that problem that you had when you were a kid. And in that
and it creates a divide. Like, if I'm normal and then that trans person is not normal,
right?
Like, that's not right. Obviously, going back to that question of what can we do moving forward, it has to be a collective effort between conversations across all different communities, because we're all suffering. The suffering is different, but also the same. It has to be a collective effort with conversations with the government as well, and a collective effort with the business sector as well, in terms of what does their CSR look like moving forward, and how can they best support the community, and particularly the most marginalized community. And it also means everyone has to get out and vote. Like, we can't have another 4 years of Donald Trump with how he's managed the pandemic. Well, hasn't actually managed it at all. But, having Trump in power has affected the way the world has managed the pandemic. It's like this is not, if this can't be more, we don't have an even worse wake up call than a pandemic.
Right. So I just want to say this. As a 501c3, the Byron Rustin Center for Social Justice cannot lobby or advocate for any one candidate. But we can say that, hey, go out and vote. That's the essential right. And when you vote, just keep in mind kindness and community. And I think that what you're saying crystallizes in this. All of our various beautifully diverse communities, but diverse communities, need to see in this moment what unites us and what brings us together. And of course we have our differences, and of course we have our struggles. And in some communities, this struggle is worse for them than another community, or this is a deeper problem or has more history to it. But in all of that, we have to look to what unites us and then have a conversation about the divisions, but first come together, right?
Absolutely. Because being who you are should bring you joy every day. Like, you should wake up and think, I really love who I am. And if that can't bring you joy, then, it's not so much that we need to fix it, but, it should. We need to, and also as well, we need to share our stories more. I think storytelling is so important, and it's the heart of who I am, and it's also the heart of changing hearts and minds. Because I think that we have to make a massive shift over the next year, over the next decade, because this administration has done so much damage over the last 4 years. I mean, when I heard the news around the Idaho anti-bill going through, I just thought, oh, I just had to stop for a moment and think, there's some trans kids in Idaho crying right now because they wanted to play sport, but they can't. And someone has just crushed their hope. And what that means when that's your one thing that you love and can't understand why you're being persecuted for being you. And, we have to change that narrative for LGBTQ kids so they grow up every day being in joy with who they are.
And I think, again, I've said it before, but it bears repeating ad infinitum. What you're doing is the very essence of that. And when you talk about, I want to pull this thread, you talked about telling our stories. And that's what it is, right? When you sit down at the dinner table with someone and you hear their story and you see them, then that changes lives, that changes perceptions, that changes perspectives every time. No doubt, no diggity. This video will be available to people, in our archive, and I hope that everybody views it again and again and brings it to their classrooms and their offices and their friends, because this is a story that needs to be heard. And all the stories need to be heard so we acknowledge who each other is. And I think we go all the way back to, guess who's coming to dinner? And we go to, when Roots was on TV and what a major impact that was, seeing this and having to acknowledge the difficulty in the history, but also the present of who we are, and when we think about, and the band played on, and we think about all those stories, and Philadelphia, the movie with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington, all these things, these moments in our media that tell the stories of our various communities, that allow us that window into it. That makes such a difference, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is how you change hearts and minds. And I think, we need to find platforms for LGBTQ, particularly homeless LGBTQ youth, to share their story. Because, I've done a lot of work in Asia, And a few years ago, I piloted the first leadership, sports, business, and education program for LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness in my own country, Vietnam. And it was so hard to get off the grounds. I mean, I would sit in front of business executives, I'd speak to them. Within half an hour, they would say, I don't even know what the acronym stands for. And, there are no LGBTQ people in our office. We don't know if we could hire them. And, we don't understand the correlation between sports and business and why you put it together. Obviously, and, I persevered in the end, and I had some fantastic companies that came on board: Nike, KPMG, Usher's organization, Usher's new look. But it also gave the kids a platform to be able to share their stories in front of business leaders who had never met an LGBTQ youth, and realized that, for some of them, obviously their stories were different, but the same. And we all have hopes and dreams. And, I think, that's what got me through my darkest hours, because I had a hope and a dream. And without that, that fire inside of you dies away. And, just because you're experiencing homelessness doesn't mean that you don't have hopes and dreams. But, we need to be able to create those platforms and those doors that those youth can go through so they can thrive.
So what was it? So do you talked about not seeing yourself and having to imagine a future for yourself, out of whole cloth. What were the moments where you finally saw yourself, or saw a sliver of yourself on a screen or in a book or in a magazine? And, do you remember some of those moments?
I do. I remember watching 21 Jump Street with Johnny Depp and seeing Dustin win on TV. He was the first Asian person that I saw on TV. And it was like, in that moment of seeing him, I could see myself in the entertainment industry. Like, he gave me that moment. And then I remember seeing Margaret Cho on television and seeing her being so outspoken as an advocate, as a proud, open, queer woman. And she showed a mirror image of what I could be as an Asian woman. And I think that's so important, because when you don't see those mirror images, you're not quite sure if you can be that person, or if you should be that person. So for me, and even now, particularly when I meet different advocates around the world and how they are in their countries, advocates who come from countries where it's illegal and you can be killed, and how open they are, that inspires me. I'm inspired by the smallest things and the greatest things. I'm constantly inspired by people that I meet that give me the inspiration to keep going, because I think I'm not necessarily doing this for myself anymore. I realize the platform that I have as an athlete ally, ambassador, as a Stonewall ambassador, as ambassador for Vietnam Relief Services, having this global platform, having the privilege of, working with political campaigns and working with different governments, of what this means to those that don't have a voice. When I sit in front of the head of state and have a conversation about their country and about why equality is important, and what it will do in terms of how it will change hearts and minds, and how it will lift their people and the economy, and how LGBTQ people will thrive within their country when they support, equality for all.
I just, you inspire me, and I know that you inspire our community. There are hundreds of people watching us right now, and I know that each and every one of them are so touched by this incredible journey. And I hope that you're writing a book. I hope that there's a book in the works. I hope there's a story that can reach a mass audience, because this is a story that needs to be out there, not only because of how interesting it is and how exciting it is. It has all those moments, but the inspiration thereof, that you chose, even in your darkest moments, to believe not only in yourself, but what you could do for others.
Yeah, and that's, the reason I am the person I am today. Through all my own suffering, I realized that, I know, and I always go back to, my suffering won't end because my suffering is your suffering, and our suffering will end collectively together. But that takes team work as well. And I can't seem to type in on the public chats, but if people want to follow me, I'm on social media. I'm at Amazin LeThi, and my website is
Right there.
AmazonLeThi. No, great, thank you. And my website is AmazonLeThi.com. I can't seem to type that either.
Yeah, we'll get that. We'll get that to everybody. I was going to get that. You beat me to the punch by half a minute. Please, everybody, visit the site. Visit on all social. All of this there's so much more. We've really just scratched the surface. So please visit the website. If you do the tools of the devil, social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all, follow, friend, and like. I'm telling you, it's worth it. This is an incredibly inspirational person, and I'm so glad that we got this time together. And I cannot believe that our time is up.
I know.
I've enjoyed this as much as I've been inspired by it, and that's a rare thing indeed. So thank you. Lastly, if I may ask you this, we have a lot of kids and adults and seniors who unfortunately are at home right now, quarantined like the rest of us, but maybe with families that aren't so accepting of them, aren't affirming, aren't respectful of who they love, how they identify, of who they are. Do you have a few words of encouragement for them, how they can persevere like you yourself did through this difficult moment and what's going to come on the other side?
I always say that there can't be a rainbow without some thunder in your life. And everything is temporary. I think the beauty of now is that we have the power of the internet. And if you're at home and you feel unsupported, you have a family or relatives that don't support you, there's a whole community in this world waiting for you, who celebrate you and love you, who will give you joy every single day for being who you are. And it's important to make those connections because there are tons of groups online for LGBTQ people. Obviously, Instagram, Twitter, dialing into conversations like this so you feel connective, because it will pass. I mean, I struggled at first with the shutdown because it really took me back to when I was homeless and felt very isolated, very alone. And I did actually go for the first few weeks. I think everyone went into a very dark place for the first few weeks of the shutdown. And someone said, love the Aussie accent. Actually, it's a mixture of Australian and British accent. But thank you. And then I kind of stopped myself and thought, oh, wait a second, I've gone through very dark times before. And, I was able to pull myself out and I can do it again. And I always go back to that phrase, I will never see a rainbow without a bit of thunder in my life. And that thunder will always make me a little bit stronger every single time. So it's just remembering that this situation is temporary, but while we are in shutdown, make sure you connect to the global LGBTQ community because we're waiting to hear from you.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll end with Paula says, what a story. Thank you. And and we agree. Please, again, social media, there is a lot of good in it, especially now, and there is where you can find our amazing guest. And on the Facebook, it actually pops up with all the information, so you're all good there. Thank you for your time, your energy, your spirit. Thanks for sharing your journey. Thanks for taking it and having the absolute knowledge that you'd be here today to help us, and we cherish you for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for being in. Thank you.
All right. And if you just don't leave yet, I want to put you away, but stay on so we can talk privately for a minute so I can say goodnight to you if you would. All right. Thank you so much. Wow. Just phenomenal. What an evening. What a story. What a journey. And we're so incredibly fortunate to have that shared with us once again. I think we'll have to have her back. It was really wonderful. And thank you all again for being with us, because as much as our guest inspired us, as much as this hour was about this conversation, it means nothing without you being there to join us for it. So thank you all for your encouragement and bringing your spirit and your community to our community. I hope that you have a great 23 hours. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for the Social Justice Power Hour with Amani Gandhi. And to tide you over for the next 23 hours, go look at her Twitter feed at Angry Black Lady. And it's an amazing journey through reproductive rights, through the law, and how the law is being absolutely devastated right now in our current moment. And we'll talk a lot about that tomorrow night. But tonight, again, thank you to our guests. Thank you to all of you. It's been a wonderful journey again. And I wish you all the best. And we'll leave with a good friend of ours who you might have seen before, but gosh, every now and then I like to bring him back because it just gives me a big old smile to end the show this way sometimes. So enjoy a visit from an old friend of ours.
Hi, this is Al Franken, and I'm glad that you tune in at 7 p.m. every weekday evening to the Bayard Rustin Social Justice Center Power Hour. It's something I support so much, and during this difficult time, it's very important that we support everybody and support each other. So much love to you, and we'll get through this.